Personally, I hated the place. For a start, I didn't believe in God, and often used to think that if there was a God, even he would get bored at the same hymns and prayers week after week. That didn't stop the vicar, though. His sermons went on for hours, and they never varied. Pray for mercy. We're being punished for our sins. We're all doomed. He may have had a point, but I never believed the answer was to be found on my knees on that hard stone floor. The church was also used for village meetings every Wednesday, but we weren't allowed to go to them until we were 16. Until then, you weren't considered grown-up enough to join in the discussion, even if you were grown-up enough to slog your guts out from dawn to dusk. It was funny how it worked. The door wasn't actually in the church, it was around the back. The church was surrounded by a cemetery full of wonky gravestones with a gravel path running through the middle, and I often used it as a shortcut home. On the other side, there was an even older church, or the remains of one that had originally stood on the site. Not much of it was left, just a couple of crumbling archways and a wall with 2 gaping holes that might once have been magnificent windows, stained glass and all the rest of it. And beneath them, a wooden door. There'd always been something strange about the door because, first of all, it didn't go anywhere. There were a couple of tombstones in front of it and a small gravel yard behind, but it didn't lead into a sacristy or cloister or any other part of the building, and there was a sort of question mark over the door itself. That is to say, who made it and when? The ruins were literally hundreds of years old. Pre-medieval, Miss Keelan said, and yet the door didn't look ancient at all. I mean, if it had been there for centuries, how come the wood hadn't rotted? Obviously someone must have replaced it, but Rita, who'd been born in the village, told me it hadn't happened in her lifetime, and that must have been almost a century in itself. It was very weird. And one evening at the end of August, it suddenly opened, and a boy fell out. I was on my way home from the orchards, where I'd been apple picking, one of my least favourite jobs, although, to be honest, anything to do with the growing and storing of food is hard work, boring and repetitive. The worst things about apple picking? Realising that the overripe golden delicious you've just spent half an hour shaking off the branch is actually going to be neither golden nor delicious. Finding that a wasp has burrowed into its rotten core and getting a nasty sting on your palm as a result. Spiking yourself for the 50th time on a bramble that's been waiting a whole year to gouge into your flesh. Lugging the basket back to the collection point in the full heat of the afternoon with blisters on your shoulders and worse ones on your fingers. And the endlessness of it. Mr. Bantoft, farm manager, fruit division, had said there were fewer apples that year. He said the entire orchard was beginning to fail, but it didn't seem that way to me. Anyway, I was tired and I was grubby and I wasn't thinking of very much when the door in the old wall opened and this boy staggered forward and crumpled onto the grass. He was quite skinny, with long, very black hair cut straight across his forehead, and I was puzzled because I didn't recognize him. But then one side of his face was streaked with blood. In fact, there were pints of the stuff pouring down the side of his cheek. It was dripping onto his shoulder, and his shirt was soaked. I ran over to him and stopped, with my heart pounding, biting on my knuckles, which is what I always do when I'm shocked by something. And here was the thing. I'd never seen this boy. Impossible though it was, I knew at once. He wasn't from the village. He saw me, and his eyes widened, reminding me of a rabbit right before you put an arrow through its throat. He wasn't as badly hurt as I'd first thought. Something had whacked into the side of his head, just above the temple, and he had a nasty cut, but I didn't think his skull was fractured. He was wearing a shirt, jeans and sneakers, and they looked new. He was about as strange as a stranger could be. He didn't even look English. His eyes were as dark as his hair, and there was something about his nose and his cheekbones. It was as if they'd been carved out of wood. "Where am I?" he asked. "You're at the church," I said. It was such an odd question I wasn't sure how to answer. "What church? Where is it?" "The church is called St. Botolph's. It's in the village." The boy